We've all seen the memes that talk about how we wish we would have learned taxes in high school instead of square dancing. And they're so relatable because, well, it's just real. It's the reality. There's a lot of things that we learned in high school, middle school that did not really translate to real life. And a lot of things that we kind of wish we would have been taught because now as adults, we need them. We need those skills. We need to know those things. And it's like nobody ever taught us that. So as a homeschooler, you have the great advantage of sort of overcoming that and adding in these topics and things into your curriculum, into your homeschool, so that you can ensure that your kids can, I don't know, maybe both square dance and do their taxes. Or maybe you even want to teach them to square dance, do taxes, and do the two-step. I don't know what you want to do with your time, but these are 8 topics that I highly recommend you incorporate into your homeschooling schedule somewhere along the line. Also, be sure to subscribe if you've not already. This is my brand new homeschooling channel. I've been making homeschooling content on YouTube for like 8 years. I finally started a separate homeschooling channel. So be sure to subscribe if you're not already, and just leave me a comment down below and say hello. Let me know where you're watching from, what grade levels you're homeschooling, how long you've been homeschooling. I love getting to know you guys in the comments. Popping in really quickly because I forgot to say this at the beginning of the video, I am hosting a free webinar all about how to choose the best curriculum for you and for your family. I know this is the time of year where a lot of us are starting to pick and choose our curriculums for next school year. Check down below in the description box for the details, and hopefully I will see you there. Let's jump in, okay? So the first one is pretty obvious, especially following our previous intro discussion, is personal finance. I think a lot of us learned about finances from our family. So, right, good or bad, if your parents were really good with money and they taught you about personal finance, then maybe that's not something that you struggle with, and it's not been an issue for you. If maybe your parents weren't great with money, or maybe they were, but they still just didn't ever talk to you about it, then you might not be great with money. And maybe you've had to learn this stuff on your own. I have a number of stories I could tell you about stupid and dumb things that I've done over the years, and I will never forget when I opened my first paycheck and I was like, where's all my money? Why'd they take all my money? My mom was like, that's called taxes, dear. And I'm like, excuse me? They have taken almost all of my paycheck and I'm not making much anyways. Really making sure our children understand, not just about having a checking account and a savings account, but about the various types of accounts that are out there, about taxes, about some basics of investments and interest rates and compounding interest on a savings account, or, a car loan where it's like interest only, a home loan. There's so many things that can like get our goat as adults, okay? And I'm going to say the controversial thing that maybe I'm not supposed to say. I think you can see that it's not being taught well by the simple fact that you have kids leaving high school, going into college, and going into tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt without understanding really what that looks like to pay that back, how long it's going to take them to pay that back, and the fact that there's absolutely nothing they can do to bankrupt out of that debt. And pile on top of that, kids going into college and the fact that people set up booths and tables and start offering them credit cards. I mean, you turn 18 and it's not high limits, but they start giving you what feels like free money if no one's ever really helped you conceptualize what that means. So I'm a big believer in helping. If your kid is college bound and you don't have money, sitting in a savings account somewhere that's going to pay for them to go to college, even if you do, it's really important that they understand how much money college costs, what kind of job are they planning to get after, how do they intend to pay that back, how much is it going to cost, what's your longevity in your career and your ability to earn that back actually look like. Number 2 is cooking. And this might seem obvious, especially as homeschoolers. We typically want to focus a lot on life skills, but I do think, again, I always want to keep in mind that for some people, they themselves don't love to cook. So maybe they only cook a few things, and there's a lot of cooking, baking skills that they themselves don't have. Well, even if you yourself have no interest in learning those things, it can still be and is very valuable for your kid to learn them. So getting our kids into the kitchen, either helping us or doing some kind of kids cook curriculum. I will link down below in the description box for each of these areas that I'm talking about, some recommended courses, books. Some of them are free, some of them are paid, but I just want to be sure that I share with you kind of some resources for each of these areas. If you're like, okay, great, I want to teach my kid about personal finances, but I don't know where to start, or I want to teach about baking, but I don't like to bake, so how do I do that? I'll link you to some resources because there's some incredible stuff out there, and some stuff we've really loved over the years. So I'll put all that down below in the description box. no matter what, for our sons and daughters, it's important that they understand how to cook for themselves, how to do more than, boil water for ramen, because it's a gift to themselves. It's also a gift to their future spouse and family. I, for one, absolutely love the fact that my husband and I both like to cook because it takes the pressure off me that I don't have to cook all the time. And my husband's a great cook. It's a skill he's acquired and honed, but he's always been willing and eager and interested. His dad cooked a lot. It was him and his dad growing up for a lot of the years, and his dad cooked a lot, but he cooks like the same 4 things. So my husband was really proficient at a few things, and he's added to that over the years. But cooking is just a great skill to have. Like I said, even if you're not a great cook, that doesn't mean that your children cannot learn those skills. It will serve them for sure. Okay, the next topic is a little bit broad, but I didn't necessarily want to break it down because I do think there's kind of an overarching thing of like wellness, personal safety, and personal care, like kind of all of this under this umbrella. But again, we took high school health classes, and I think we can all agree that like what we were taught, especially in some of these health and nutrition books, is not always really even up to speed with like current understanding of health and nutrition, exercise, and things like that. So I do think that there's a lot that we can add in for our children there. I think it's really important that, let's say, for example, you have kids in your family that have like food allergies or something like that, or maybe they just have a health condition or something that precludes them from eating certain types of food. It's really important to teach our kids how to research these things, how to dig in and figure out like, okay, this thing is going on, and how they can then be like an advocate for themselves and talking about things with their doctor, but also understanding that sometimes you may know something to be true and the medical field may ignore you. They may say, no, that's not true, but you know it to be true. I think it's important that our kids understand that medical doctors are human beings too, and they make errors, they make mistakes, sometimes, most of the time, not intentionally, though sometimes they can get a bit of a God complex and they won't listen to you when you're saying something's going on. So I think teaching our children how to advocate for themselves in that like health and wellness space, and not just advocate for themselves, but also how to find research so that they don't necessarily go out there and search for something and find some forum somewhere with a bunch of people just talking about it and decide that that must make it true. How they can find things out, figure things out, how they can look up medical studies, research papers, medical papers, and really kind of dig into their own health and well-being. And this, of course, applies across a number of topics. And I know this sounds like a little broad, but I just feel like making sure that our children know how to advocate for themselves in the health and wellness space is really important. But also, maybe even more importantly, is personal safety. I am a huge believer for all of our kids, but I will say the thing that maybe I'm not supposed to say, which is that for our daughters especially, I am a big believer in taking the world as it is and not as I wish it to be, which means that I am going to teach my daughters the very practical reality of their personal safety. As someone who grew up like in the South with a lot of manners and things that were required. It's like an 11th commandment or something. Thou shalt always be respectful and kind to everyone, no matter how weird and creepy they are. And that need to please and always come across as very kind, the sort of people-pleasing nature can put our daughters into very vulnerable places. And I do think that we are dulling down our intuition, our senses. It's really important that in a world where women have lost a lot of their instincts and intuitions due in many parts to things that are out of their control, that we bring that back. I really could go on and on about this, but it's just very important to me that I'm raising my daughters to listen to their intuition. I love the book by Gavin DeBecker, The Gift of Fear. It's definitely a hard read. It's a little disturbing. It kind of messed with my head for a little bit, so I don't recommend giving that to your younger daughters to read, but you might pull some things out of it through their teen years. But I would say by the time they are 17, 18, especially if they're going to go away to college, that's a mandatory read. Because while it is, especially some of the opening parts of it or just the stories in it can be disturbing, it's the reality and they need to know that. And so if they have been raised in the safety of home and, their town and everything, that maybe they are truly not thinking that it's actually possible for something like that to happen. So I'm just a huge believer in personal safety for our daughters, making sure that they understand situational awareness. Again, with cell phones plastered in our faces, I see it all the time everywhere I go. Young girls not paying any attention. Their faces are buried in their phones in parking lots, and to make them like a sitting duck to a predator. So again, I'm not trying to be like depressing here, but I just think that this is a topic that there's not enough information out there about. There's not enough. I'd love to see more in the way of like courses and programs and things that we could put our middle school and high school age daughters through. Obviously, we all know to teach our younger kids about stranger danger and stuff, but do we do a good job of teaching our older daughters and older children about manipulative people and people like, kind of like tricky people, but on a more adult level, right? We teach them about tricky people when they're young, like people offering you candy and come see my puppy. But do we do that with our older kids? Teaching our older kids about tricky people matters too. So anyways, I could go off on a tangent about that. And of course, what goes hand in hand with that is not just in-person safety, but online safety and internet safety. And I'm glad this conversation comes up, I feel like, a lot online, but I just don't know. I feel like it's a tsunami. And we're just trying to like take teaspoons to be like, watch out for this, watch out for this. And it's a tsunami coming at them. Whatever choice you make about your children having devices or, social media and stuff is up to you, but ensuring that our children are aware of, again, what those tricky people look like online and in online games and social media apps, wherever your children are. And that also means sometimes as parents, we have to stay on top of, if you have a child that's old enough to have those things, you kind of have to stay on top of what the kids are doing and what kind of apps are out there and how they're being used. If you're going to allow your children to have phones and have internet access in those apps and stuff, you've got to be aware of the things that may look totally benign, but the kids are using it for this or that. It's a lot. It's really changed the responsibility that comes with parenting and really ushered in a whole new wave of concerns and things that we have to worry about and watch out for as parents. There's lots of information, though, out there to help you with internet safety and keeping your kids safe on the internet, teaching them about that. Thank goodness. That is a topic that is very robustly covered, so I will link some resources for that as well for you. The next thing, we'll go to a little lighter note here. The next thing is teaching our kids about organization and like productivity, and not in a teaching our kids how to hustle way, but teaching our kids how to understand themselves, understand what kind of strategies work for them. This is, again, what I love so much about homeschooling is it allows us to help our children figure out like what's their best time of day for work. How do they study best? How do they learn best? How do they keep things organized? What works for them? Do they need to be able to see things, or can they put things away and keep them in a certain like tidy order? Everybody operates differently in this way. And so while typically we just say, well, this is how I operate, this is what I'm doing, and so everyone will come behind me and do the same thing, that it's not necessarily going to help them when they get out of your house, and maybe they personally need a totally different strategy or way, and they've not yet figured it out. I think especially if you have a child who's naturally very disorganized, it's just not their nature, helping them to find the skills that they can balance to where they can do organization enough that it keeps them from dropping the ball and forgetting things, but not so much that it becomes overwhelming and they just ditch it, right? If they're not organized and you are super organized, it's going to be very hard and likely never going to bridge that gap. So finding a middle ground to where we can teach them about, here's the things that really matter in order to keep you from forgetting things, failing at things, but then we can let the rest of it go, because that's not how your brain works, right? Like that's not how you stay organized. It's great to help teach our kids really important skills about time management, again, productivity, because we kind of have these preconceived notions about exactly how things have to be done. But the truth is that people do things in all kinds of different ways, and they have different strategies. There's some tried and true ones out there that seem to work for a lot of people. So starting those, and if they don't, then maybe we can look at some of the sort of outlying strategies, and you might just find that, aha, I thought my kid was just like a disorganized disaster. Turns out they just needed this thing, this system, they needed a timer, whatever, in order to get the things done. which then brings me to study and note taking and like studying habits. This is something that I really started working on specifically with my high schoolers. And it's been really awesome because, again, nobody taught me that in school. It was just like sink or swim, right? And I remember looking at other girls who were really, really organized and they had like different colored pens and their notes were like beautiful. And mine were just kind of all over the place. They'd start great and then it would go crazy. Later learned that because that was where my attention span failed, like was done. That was the end of attention span. Okay. But how to study, right? Like just sitting down and trying to cram for something is not the best strategy for a lot of people. So how can they use what we know about the brain, what we know about retention, what we know about durable learning? How can they use those strategies to help them so that studying and retention of information, taking notes in class becomes something that feels worth the time because they're not having to waste their time. They're doing what matters, what moves the needle, what makes it work, and letting go of the rest. So they don't have to feel like, oh, I just spent my whole life studying for these tests and it's just terrible and I hate it. And it reinforces that idea that school is a punishment, that learning is a punishment, because now you have to spend all day studying for this test and it's just the worst and I have to cram until 3 o'clock in the morning. It's a terrible strategy that doesn't work for most people. And so I think we can, again, help our kids to reignite that love of learning and seeking information and wanting to learn and retain by helping them to understand the strategies, learn the strategies, the skills that will allow them to do that in an efficient way that hopefully keeps the learning as interesting as possible without weighing them down with just a bunch of notes and studying strategies that they just come up with on their own and hope they work. Again, I have a few favorite books and resources about this topic, so I will link those down below. Next, I want to mention adding in a course, a program, even like a mini course. It doesn't even have to be like a full curriculum or anything, but about logic and reasoning. And again, I will put links down below because I have a few different recommendations for you depending on the age of your child and how much you really want to invest into this topic. But it's been one of my favorite topics to study alongside my children because I grew up with a mom who was a thinker, and she would love to have these like intellectual conversations in the car, and it would always come out of nowhere. And one of her favorite things to do was like debate a topic. She'd say a topic and then she'd tell you to like pick which side you want. She didn't care. She'd argue either side. And so she was a very rational and is a very rational thinker and more of a stoic type, I guess I would say. And so I learned a lot from her just by example. I really wanted to make sure that I was passing on to my children the importance of understanding how powerful these tools can be, thinking logically and being how to reason something out, which also gives you skills for arguments and confrontations and dealing with people that maybe you disagree with and stuff. I think there's a lot of maturity to be found in understanding that, in understanding logic and reasoning, and how to implement those things into your life and your worldview, why it matters, and something that I think could just be beneficial across the board for most kids, if not all children, to have some more intentional experience in this sort of field and topic, which then brings me to the topic of psychology. A lot of times, psychology is not something that is discussed until college. Now, the explosion of research and information about like evolutionary psychology and anthropology and understanding the basics of like how our brains work, we're talking about mental health more and things like that. So I do feel like the topic of psychology is coming more to the forefront. So I think it will be much easier to weave this in, but I think it's something that, especially if your child maybe is not college bound, maybe their career choice, the things that they want to do, does not mean that they're going to be going away to a 4-year university where they might take a psychology class. I think that this is so beneficial. And again, this kind of falls into the category of something that we could definitely distill down and start talking about and teaching our children from a very young age. So then that brings me to the very last thing, which is teaching our kids about manipulation in marketing. We live in a world that has this element of social media in it now that has like taken that hand around our neck of marketing and like cinched them down even tighter, where it's made It's made the manipulation, the veil of things even more deceptive and with even more ability to trick us or make us think that everyone else is seeing this way when they're really not. Like helping our kids understand the manipulation that happens in both marketing and media and how they can see the signs of something not being true, how they can balance their intake of information, how they can see through certain languaging in marketing ads, and how they can recognize what things they're seeing online for what they are, whether they are meant to be aesthetically pleasing or inspirational, but not reality. And so being able to split those apart for those of us who grew up with most of our lives not being online and with social media and have only had this in sort of the second half, if you will, it's definitely like crazy. I feel like we have this good split of seeing like life before and life after, and it's wildly different. And it can really change how you see yourself, how you see your own life. And it can be very dangerous. I think we can all agree on that. So it doesn't have to be a full course that you like give credits for or anything. You can add it in as like part of an elective or something that you just add in as like a little 6-week thing that you want to sit down and teach and just be more intentional about talking to your kids about these certain topics, or having them just take a few little online things that are free or inexpensive but will help kind of ground them in some of these topics. They're all things that will benefit them for the rest of their lives, and things that I think most of us, if you're anywhere around my age bracket, right, swinging 10 years one way or the other, could say that, man, these are things that if you were taught them, you're probably really grateful that you were. And if you weren't, you really wish you had.